Good morning, everyone. We will start in just a few minutes. We do have a couple people still registering out in the hall. I'm so glad to see so many of you here today. I know you're all looking forward to seeing Rodney and hearing him tell all. And hello to everyone who's joining us on live stream. And for those of you who are catching this later on YouTube, we appreciate your watching also. How are we doing outside, David?
5 more people coming.
Okay, 5 more people. We may need some more chairs out. We have a new table up front. Are there more people outside? Welcome again. This is a fantastic turnout. We should have had Rodney here sooner. So welcome on this warm summer day. I won't say sunny, but warm. And we will have a roving microphone going around. So if you do have a comment or question, we ask that you wait for the microphone and speak in it so that our friends that are on live stream will be able to hear the questions or comments also. And we've also got pads on the table and some pens, so if you do want to jot down any notes, feel free. And David, sorry, now that you're walking away, would you start us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. It's so good to see everyone here, and welcome to the Third Age Gathering. Let us open our hearts with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks, O Lord, that you are God whose creativity knows no bounds, that by calling the universe from empties and chaos into order, Lord, that you create beauty, and the beauty and sacredness come together throughout our tapestries of faith stories. We give you thanks, O God, that we can gather today and then to learn more of your beauty expressed by those who you have created. We ask, O God, that you bless this time that we gather, and bless our speaker Rodney this day, our friend Rodney this day, through his multiple gifts and extraordinary experiences, that we may come to learn more of the joy of learning your beauty and sacredness. And this we pray in your name. Amen. Okay.
I did forget to introduce myself. I'm Sue Kohler. I'm the chair of the Third Age Committee, and we do have other Third Age Committee members here. If you would like to join us, just let us know. We'd be happy to have you on the committee. Help us select and put together new programs. That would be wonderful. And right now, I'll introduce one of our committee members, Terry Mcewen, who will introduce Rodney.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many people here. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Rodney Allen Schwartz. He's the director of the Westminster Gallery and Archive at Westminster Presbyterian Church, where he curates, designs, and installs exhibitions and manages the art collection and church archive. He joined Westminster in 1983, served 2 terms as deacon, and he's ushered for many decades here at Westminster in the 1030 service. He earned his PhD in 2006 at the University of Minnesota in design and color theory, taught graphic design as a graduate student, and wrote his dissertation on the European over-decoration of Oriental porcelain in the 18th century. Wow. He also did his undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota. And he is the person that's responsible for all the beautiful art that is displayed in our building here. And he's just a wealth of knowledge with the art pieces that are in our collection. And he'll be giving you a history of how his position came about at our church and all that's involved in his role here at Westminster. So it is my pleasure once again to introduce Rodney Allen Schwartz, our friend Rodney Allen Schwartz.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so nice to look at a room full of people who want to listen to me talk. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say, but I think I'll probably think of something that will keep us entertained. I also want to welcome the people who are watching us on live stream. A minute ago, Keith gave me a peek, and there were 17. So imagine the room half again as many people, and then we can have a lot of fun. A special shout out to Sarah, who I know is watching from afar. So we're going to talk a little bit about art. I was asked to explain a little bit about how the gallery started, how I came to be the director of the gallery, a little bit about what we collect and how we collect, and a little bit about how we do exhibitions. This has been billed as a tell-all. I think it's really going to be a tell-some. I'm not sure that I really should tell all. I like to talk about art, obviously. It's kind of in my blood. I prefer, of course, to be in the gallery or somewhere in the building in front of a piece of art talking about it, rather than talking about it without it being next to me. And I decided that I didn't want to make a PowerPoint presentation to show you images of art when we could just go out through the doors and see the real thing. And I think back to my days as an undergraduate taking art history classes. You saw everything that you talked about either in a textbook or in slides projected onto a screen. And of course, every piece of art that was projected was the same size. So the Mona Lisa, which is like this big, looked like it was the same size as the Night Watch, which is, as big as our building. And so it's very deceptive. So we're not going to worry about that. Well, as Terry said, I joined in 1983. I was one of those members who walked across the street from my condo, sat in the back of the sanctuary for worship, and then turned around and went home again, and really wasn't involved for the first couple of years. And then suddenly, someone invited me to be a deacon. And my response was, what? Why? Why would I do that? I totally didn't get it. And I initially said, no, I don't think so. But I guess somehow I thought it over, and a couple weeks later I asked if it was still an option. So I became a deacon, and then, of course, I became an usher. In those days, if you didn't sing in the choir, you had to usher. It was part of how that all worked. So I'm still basically sort of ushering, although I'm not claiming my aisle as much as I did probably for all those decades earlier. So I went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, and while I was there, I was working at the Goldstein, which is the design museum on the university's campus. and they have collections of historic textiles and costume and decorative arts and graphic designs. And as a graduate assistant, I worked with designing and installing exhibitions. I worked with publications and events and kind of everything that a museum would do. Also, because they have a big collection, I learned quite a bit about archiving materials. And so as a member, I would eventually have all of that under my belt as some of my expertise. Now, the gallery happened almost by accident. It was the spring of 2002, and the Marquette wing had opened. It was the day that we were cutting the ribbon, and out in the area out here between the carpet and the slate floor, Tim Hart Anderson was cutting the ribbon, and he asked Liz Heller and Don Meisel to help him with the ribbon cutting. And then the surprise announcement was made that this was the Meisel room and that was the Heller Commons. And so only some of the boards and the clergy knew. It was a big surprise to everyone, especially the people for whom rooms were named. Liz, of course, would be very happy to tell you that the Heller Commons was named after her. She took great pride in that. Well, while this ribbon cutting was happening, Tim looked at Liz and said, you know, this room out here is really beautiful, but it needs some art. And we don't know if he actually had been thinking about that or it just came off the cuff. But that is how the gallery started. Liz and I knew each other, both because we lived across the street in the same condo building, but we also knew each other from the university, from the Goldstein events. And so she called me and asked me if I wanted to co-chair a task force to start a gallery. And we put together a task force with 8 other people who were curators or museum people or had specialties in art and design. And 3 months later, we had our first exhibition on the wall in September of 2002. And we haven't stopped since then, of course. Now, the early days were a little complicated. We wanted to have a gallery, and of course we had these beautiful brand new sheetrock walls that were not designed to be a gallery. And so the first thing we did was go to Sam Cook, who was the director of administration, and say, you know, we're going to start a gallery. Do you want to put in a hanging system, or should we start putting nails in the walls? And believe it or not, within a couple of months, we had the hanging system of our dreams installed. And of course, over time, as we have taken over space, you know, the gallery is the gallery, but the whole building is a gallery. So every time Rodney has an opportunity, there's more hanging system that goes up and, you know, a little bit more lighting goes in. Also in those early days, we didn't really have any resources, and I remember going upstairs to the office and saying, we're starting a gallery, we're volunteers, Liz is involved, and we need some supplies. We need a stapler and some other things. And the response was, well, do you have a budget? So we really started from kind of nothing. And then around the corner in the Bushnell room, there's a little closet under the stairs. That was the office, and I had a cardboard box as a filing cabinet. So if you know about the current archive, you understand we really have made some pretty serious headway over time. Well, so what did we put in this gallery? The first exhibition was things that came off of Liz's walls. I think most of you probably knew Liz Heller. She graduated from the seminary in 1950 and collected Christian art, religious art, modestly. If she would find a student or an artist that she knew and they were producing art, she would buy kind of everything that she could afford. She collected both broad and deep religious stories. Her focus really was the washing of the feet, but she collected a little bit of everything. And in this 3-bedroom condo, the art was floor to ceiling, wall to wall, under the bed, behind the doors, in a filing cabinet. And so it was this great lending library for us to build from. And of course later, as she went to the nursing home, much of that art came to us, and then in her estate, of course, it all became part of our collection. So we have a lot of Liz out on our walls, and we're very grateful for all of her contributions. In about 2006, we were preparing for our 150th anniversary, and I was hired on a contract basis. I had only been a volunteer with this other committee up until that point. I was hired on a contract basis to help with the 150th anniversary. My title was something like Special Assistant to the Sesquicentennial, which sounds very grand, doesn't it? It meant that I started organizing our archive and helped to do a lot of the research for the history book that was produced for the 150th. And then I made myself indispensable. Somehow it just happened. So when the anniversary celebration was over and the book was produced and we were getting more serious about things, part of the campaign built the archive and the Columbarium Memorial Garden, the new courtyard. And so there was new space for the gallery and new volunteers. And my job increased a little bit, and eventually I became a staff person and eventually became full-time. So you can volunteer for something that you have a passion about and turn it into your career. I'm one of those lucky people. When I come to work, I don't really feel like I'm working. I'm just kind of playing with things and playing with friends and people, and it's all good. So I'm sometimes known as our friend Rodney, and I'm not sure if you know the origin of that nickname. Brennan Blue was here as associate pastor, and he oftentimes did the time with children. And he would like to introduce a concept, tease them a little bit about something, and then he would ask our friend Rodney to help. And so I would come from around the corner with a piece of art that I would present for the children and, of course, the congregation to see. Very happily, that nickname stuck. I'm very happy to be your friend, as it were. So what do we collect? We strive to collect a multicultural and multi-ethnic viewpoint. We're working to diversify our collection beyond sort of what we have. When the gallery first started, there were about 8 pieces of original art in the building. Of course, the building was much smaller then, remember. That wing hadn't been built. This wing had just been opened, so it was a much smaller complex. There were portraits of former pastors and some art that I would describe as dead white men art. Most of them landscape paintings, some of them very good, some of them by known artists, and a couple of biblical paintings that were very competently done, hand-copied paintings of an original that existed somewhere. And it was all good and fine, but that really isn't what we are all about. We're looking to tell more contemporary stories, and one of my minor agendas is to prove that Jesus really wasn't Swedish. And so you'll have to look long and hard to find a blonde-haired and blue-eyed Jesus in our collection. I suspect it exists, but if it does, it's accidental. So this collection, where do we get the art? Where does it come from? We have art by local artists that we've gotten to know, and maybe we've had an exhibition of their work. James Quinton Young comes to mind, the man who makes the crosses from found objects. We've had multiple exhibitions of his work, and of course we have a very, very large collection of his work, some of it through purchase, and a number of pieces that were gifts of he and his wife. The artist Ted Chi, the Chinese artist, was living locally for about a decade, and we had exhibitions of his work and acquired some of his pieces. Joan Bolig, who lives in Egan, is another local artist who we've collected fairly substantially. I also have the opportunity to travel. Christians in the Visual Arts, known as SIVA, is an organization I belong to almost from the beginning. They have biennial conferences, and I've traveled to, I think, a dozen of them, various places around the country. It's an organization that's mostly artists, and so there might be 400 people at the convention, and 325 of them are artists. The others are curators and collectors and clergy and various other people connected to the church that are interested in art. Now, what is very curious, and I was quite surprised the first time I went, is that many of these Christian artists don't actually make religious art. They're Christians that happen to make art. And of course, if you're trying to build a collection, that's kind of a disappointment. So sometimes I would come home with a purchase for the collection. Sometimes I might find someone that we could borrow something from. But it wasn't the most satisfying sort of shopping experience as it was to go to these conferences. The last one was in Texas in November, and I did come home with the painting. So that was a success. The other way that we sometimes find art is through travel. Of course, we have global partnerships in Cuba and Cameroon and Palestine. I trust you all know that. The art in this room is from those partnerships. This corner and this wall is Cuba. This is Cameroon, and the other half of the room is Palestine. And yes, I know some very lazy curator installed the art and hasn't put labels up yet, but that will come. I've had the opportunity to travel to all of our partnerships, some of them several times. And one of the ways we can support our partners there is to purchase things. And there are active arts movements and very busy artists in all of those locations. So our collection is able to reflect the culture and the time and the life of our partners there. Sometimes art comes to us from a variety of different sources. I trust that you're all familiar with The Birth of Freedom, the Granlund that stands out on the Nicollet Mall, which was a gift to us in 1976 from the Crosby family. And sometime after that, Don Meisel's family gave a wall piece that hangs in the Cloister Hall in memory of Ellie. And that was our collection for a very long time. Once the gallery started and Paul Granlund died, we had an exhibition about 2 years after his death and pulled from both things that the family had and also that Westminster members have. I think that the reality is there's an awful lot of Granlund sculpture out in our membership. And so some of those came to visit us at church. And I'm sure you know that the Granlund exhibition, or the collection, has grown quite a bit. We have a dozen now smaller pieces. And how did we get those? Where did they come from? Some of them were purchased with memorial funds. Some of them were purchased with a donor who knew that something was available and supplied the funds. Some of them were gifts that came out of members' homes. 2 of them I found on eBay. Some of them have come from consignment shops or art galleries. And one of them came from an estate sale. And I don't typically go to estate sales, but very luckily the person who had this contacted us and said, I know you have the big Birth of Freedom out on the mall, and I suspect you have a model of it as it was built, but do you know that there was an earlier model? And we have one of these in this estate sale. Can you believe how early in the morning I got up and how quickly I drove to this location so that I could be in line to get a number? And you play the game. I actually had number 11, but I was the only person I think who actually knew that this thing existed in the building, and I just assumed that nobody else was as interested as I was. And so when I got my chance to the door, I ran because they had tipped me off to where it was in the house. So we go to all kinds of extremes in order to figure out how to acquire art. Now, sometimes we might commission a piece of art for a special event or occasion, or because there's something that we'd like to have in the collection that isn't just out there that you can go and acquire. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about this piece on the easel. It's made by Diane Van Ark, who is a calligrapher, obviously. She was one of the people who wrote the St. John's Bible. If you remember, St. John's Abbey did the first handwritten, with all of the traditional materials and techniques, Bible in 500 years. So she is one of the people who worked on creating that Bible. And we commissioned her to do this piece kind of as a surprise. Of course, you recognize the text if you're able to read it from where you are. Oops. I guess I don't have the label. So it's Tim's charge that he gives at the end of every service. And I thought that this was the perfect thing on which to base an exhibition. There are 10 discrete moments of text. Go forth into the world in peace, be of good courage, hold fast to that which is good. I used to be able to do all of it from memory. I think I'd get it out of order if I kept going. But so I designed an exhibition where there were 10 sections. Each one of them had 2 or 3 pieces of art for our collection that sort of illustrated that particular concept. And then this piece served, of course, as the introductory panel. And I teased in publicity that there was a surprise exhibition, and this was hanging on the wall, covered, and I invited Tim to bring his family in for a surprise. And so they came into the gallery, and we unveiled this surprise piece and then walked through the exhibition. It was one of those magical moments where you conceive of something and create something wonderful and then can keep it a surprise. So when we think about how we get art or where art comes from, there's kind of the Rodney Good Housekeeping seal of approval that I have that I learned during my time at the Goldstein, which of course was a design museum. So I ask 2 questions about a piece of art. is it well designed, and is it well made? You can have some really incredibly good idea and have a really good design, but execute it poorly. The craftsmanship might not be appropriate. Or you could have a really dumb idea, but execute it really well. And so I sort of look through those lenses as we contemplate a possible acquisition of art. We also like to collect things that are about process, and I'm going to ask my assistant to come and help me now. So sometimes we want to know a little bit more about how things are made. And I have a sketch that you'll have a chance to look at it later closely. It's just a very rough sketch. It isn't particularly finished. It doesn't seem to be particularly impressive as a piece of art. But the important thing is who created it. This is a sketch by the sculptor Paul Granlund. And I didn't know that he did sketches. I understand from his wife Edna that he didn't really do drawings. He didn't do full-scale drawings of any kind when he created pieces because he was working in 3 dimensions. So he would make miniature models. And this is a miniature model of the Birth of Freedom that came fairly early in the process and was rejected very quickly by the donor and by the committee working on this commission because it wasn't jubilant enough. Well, this little model ended up being given to Don Meisel as a souvenir, and he had it in his house for a very long time. And then at some point, he gave it to a friend of his. And after Don Meisel's death, this friend realized that it actually belonged here. So it kind of went full circle and came back to our collection. But it's a very telling example of the thought process of how you get from what he sees in his head and what he describes to the donor to what actually is produced. The sketch, again, is a figure from behind. We can't really tell if it's a sketch for a particular piece of art or not. It's just a figure study. It could be masculine, it could be feminine. It's a little bit difficult to tell. The hips are possibly feminine, but the hair is possibly masculine, and I don't know that it matters. But for a collection where we are curious about how things happen, how things are made, it's really nice to have some of these process pieces as part of what we collect. This one next. That's the top one. So I was also asked if I would bring in my favorite piece of art. And this may not look like it's my favorite piece of art because it's not colorful or maybe obvious what it is. This is an image of Simeon and the Christ child. And you think about Jesus has been born and he's presented in the temple. It's a traditional thing that, of course, happens with children. And Simeon is there, and he is so glad because he has waited his entire life for the birth of the Savior. And this is the text of what he says. Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, to be a light, to lighten the Gentiles, and to be the glory of thy people Israel. Of course, this is the text of the song, the Nunc Dimittis. And there are many different versions of the Nunc Dimittis. There happens to be one arranged by a Russian composer that our choir used to sing a long time ago. And it's one of my favorite moments in music. And so that will be sung at my memorial service. And hopefully this piece of art will be on the cover of my memorial bulletin. It's a woodcut print. And what I like about it, it was made in 1959, and it looks exactly like it was from 1959, and it looks very much like a woodcut. It's a very honest representation of the image through the technique with which it was made. So now you know one of my secrets. You've seen my favorite piece of art. We're going to look at one last piece just because we can. Yes, we have crop art in the collection. Why wouldn't we have crop art in the collection? This is Minnesota. It only makes sense. And obviously this is Easter lilies and a cross. You hopefully saw it in the last exhibition. It was just in the gallery. Okay, you can put it away. So we have a gallery, we have a collection, we make exhibitions. What is the purpose of exhibitions? Generally, it's to tell stories. Over the course of a year, we do typically 6 exhibitions. Advent and Christmas is an obvious one. Lent and Easter, of course, is obvious. There's a short space in between, which could have any variety of themes. Typically, in the summer, we do an exhibition of art made by our members. I have just sort of announced that and put out a call for art. This year, the theme is the joy of being, which is intentionally very vague because life right now is crazy enough that I think that almost any piece of art that someone would create could represent the joy of being. And now the waiting game goes. I have no clue who's going to submit or what they're going to submit, how many pieces of art there will be. It's one of those, I have no control over what's going to happen with this exhibition. It's whatever comes in the door goes on the wall. And while it takes the least amount of effort on my part, oftentimes it's people's favorite exhibition because, of course, it's made by our members. The current exhibition, John August Swanson, is very dear to my heart. We started to collect his work fairly early on in the days of the gallery, and we have collected, I would say, somewhat aggressively. He started out as a sort of lost child. He had a Swedish father and a Mexican mother, born in Los Angeles. His father was alcoholic and left home. He was, John as a child was looking for his father, sometimes found him and kind of wished he hadn't. Was a little bit of a lost soul. He was discovered by Sister Creta Kent, who was a nun who was an artist. She was outspoken and vocal, particularly against the Vietnam War. She became so vocal in her protests that she had to give up her vocation and leave the church. But she opened a school and taught art. And so she became John's mentor, both in social justice themes and in creating art. And they also protested together. The exhibition has a small body of her work and some introductory material about her, but the exhibition really features his biblical serigraphs. He made art about the acrobats in the circus, about musicians and orchestras, and also biblical art. And as a Catholic, of course, his storyline was very broad. We don't collect the saints or the images of Mary so much as we do the other parts of the Bible. So when you're looking at an exhibition like this, there's all kinds of questions about how do you install it, what decisions do you make. In this case, it was kind of easy. We decided we wanted to show off our entire collection. So everything we have of John's is in the gallery. And then how do you order it? How do you put it on the walls? We chose to pull a couple of pieces out as sort of introductory images and then put them into biblical order. So it's as if you were reading the Bible, you would encounter the art as you would encounter the stories. But another interesting way that we could have done it was to install them in the order in which he made them. If you look carefully, you'll find some fairly crude, fairly simple pieces mixed in among these incredibly detailed pieces of art. And I think that if we'd hung them in the order in which he created them, it would have been a very interesting experience to see just the progression of his style and the development of his technique. So, you know a little bit about me and how I got here. You know a little bit about how the gallery started and how we collect art and how we make exhibitions. Of course, you know that I love to talk about art and I love to give tours. And we're not going on a walking tour today, but I encourage you to, at some time in the future, organize yourselves and present yourself for a scheduled tour. There's one that I did recently that was an awful lot of fun. We looked at all of the more interesting, perhaps even unusual art in the collection, which is dispersed around the building. And this, unfortunately, is a tour that requires a lot of walking and a lot of steps because the interesting things are in all of the corners. But it's a tour I'd be happy to repeat at some point. So I'm guessing you might have some questions. There's a microphone coming. Oh, no, here.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'll take my mask off. Can you please speak about the funding that you have and what your budget is on a yearly basis?
Sure.
Thank you.
We're always a little bit hesitant to talk about money in the particulars, but I can talk about money in the general. So, of course, I'm on staff full-time, and so me and my benefits are part of the cost of running the church. There is a small budget that supports the gallery and a small budget that supports the archive, mostly for, materials and expenses and an occasional reception and that sort of thing. Our art collection really is donor-driven, and that happens several different ways. There are, in the past, a lot of people gave money as memorials. Someone would die, there'd be memorial money given to the church, and oftentimes that went into a fund that I was able to spend from. That process has slowed a little bit. I think people are giving fewer memorials, and they're being maybe more intentional about gifting them towards the new building and not so much to the art. So that isn't really a source for funding anymore. There is an arts fund, and there are people who occasionally will just send in a check. I know you're going to go on a trip. You probably are going to find some art. Here's some money. So it goes into a particular fund that I can spend from. In fact, there is a wonderful opportunity coming up just like that in another month. I mentioned SIVA, this organization that's mostly artists. Well, some of the current and former board members decided they'd like to start a little offshoot organization that is less about artists and more about curators and collectors and academics. And to get the ball rolling in this little organization, they decided to put together something very special. And it is a week in Paris, limited to 12 people, by invitation. And yes, I'm going. And I'm going because one of our donors is making that trip possible, and also has provided a little bit of funding that I can spend while I'm there if I find some art to acquire. Additionally to that fund, there are people who sometimes just step up and say, I think you need something. I've seen something in a gallery, maybe you'd like it, let's go look at it. I really like that process because it's not, here, take this, I bought it for you, but there's something you might like, and if you like it, we'll acquire it for you. Lots of different ways that these things happen. The biggest change to this whole process is going back to our dear friend Liz Heller, who died several years ago. Her estate was settled last year, and she gave a legacy gift to Westminster, which is very nice. But it was specifically only for the acquisition and conservation of art. And this is the first year that then some of that interest can be spent. And so, yes, I am going to spend a few days in London next month, and then I'm going to spend a week in Paris, traveling with some very serious curators and collectors. And we are going to go to the markets and the galleries and the places from which Christian art can be acquired. And I will have funds from Liz Heller in my back pocket to spend. So this is wonderful because that endowment produces income every year, which means every year there is money that can be spent on art. And it's a nice amount. It's not a crazy amount. Of course, other people are very free now that that fund has been started to make contributions to it. So within the legacy program or within the endowment, there is an art fund. And we wanted that for a very long time, but we had to have a certain chunk of seed money to start it. And now it's there. Sure.
Rodney, I love the art gallery that's there right now with John Swanson pieces, and his artwork is called seriograph. Could you explain how that whole process is done? Because it's so colorful and it's so beautiful to look at, and all the little details that he puts in every little corner.
Sure.
It's amazing.
Okay. So in describing John August Swanson's work, the middle of his career when he made these seriographs, it's a cross between a stencil and a silk screen. If you understand either of those things, then you can kind of imagine. He generally started with a screen that was a sheet of clear mylar, and for the most part would punch holes through it, and then the ink would be pushed through those holes. Most of his work is almost like a pointillist painting, if you think about Seurat, where it's just little dots of color, and they mix together, so when you see them at a distance, it all makes sense. John kind of couldn't stop. And so he has, 30, 40, 50, sometimes more colors in a print, which means he had to make that many stencils, and then they had to be perfectly aligned and printed to make a series of work. And part of the magic of why his art is so colorful and so vibrant is some of those inks were matte, and some of them were glossy, and some of them were opaque, and some of them were transparent. And when you start putting dozens and dozens of different colors of ink on top of each other in dots, it produces this magical image. He also had, of course, incredible attention to detail, and there is no empty corner anywhere in any of his work.
Rodney, we've got a question from live stream, and that is, can you tell us about Westminster's Crush collection?
Of course I can. So we started from, I don't know, whenever. There were a few crushes in the collection that occasionally made their way out sort of before the gallery. In 2004, Martha Spencer Rogers, who's a Westminster member, gifted us with a fairly impressive and fairly large collection of crushes. She had lived in La Paz, Bolivia for a couple of years, and her neighbors collected crushes, and she wanted to be in on this Christmas event. And so she came back to St. Paul with a number of crushes in her suitcase. Her sister and she were a little bit competitive, and so they both collected and went to conferences and conventions and various things. And then in 2004, this gift came, not only the 110 crushes representing most of the world and the cases that they are in, but 4 years later, she gave us an additional 80 more. And of course, we haven't stopped. We're still acquiring crushes for the collection.
Morning, Rodney. I had some questions in the back of my mind. Are you actually the guy that goes around putting holes in the wall and hanging these? And if so, you got any tips on that? And can you comment on this hanging system, or is that what's? Oh, also, I've read articles. No more halogen lights on art, only LED. Is that something that you're involved in as well? Mm-hmm. And just lastly, you mentioned a walking tour that might require steps. Out here at the 12th and Marquette door, there's a series of little short steps leading to the second floor, and there's a piece of art hanging there that I sometimes tell people looks like a Renaissance painting, something by Dutch masters, but of course it wouldn't be, would it? And what is that? And I guess that's all I have to ask.
That's a lot of questions. I think I can do them. I'm trying and go in reverse. The painting at the top of the stairs on the way to the education wing, just out in the Marquette entrance, is an image of Jesus in the temple with the elders, and it was painted by, I know perfectly well, the original of it hangs in Riverside Church in Manhattan, and this is a very nice hand-painted copy of it. And I know the name, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. It's one of what I call our legacy pieces of art. It was here before we started. It's dead white men's art. It's not what we collect, but we have it, and so, we're honoring that sort of that way. The hanging system that we use in the building is a Japanese engineered system that is about as slick as it can possibly be. It has wires and hooks that are very, very easy to maneuver. Even after you have something on the wall, you can make adjustments without taking the piece of art off of it. I'm really glad that we have it, and I'm glad we have it everywhere. And while, yes, I'm one of the people who puts things on the walls and makes holes, we have one of our wonderful volunteers right here. Rick is one of the people who joins me with some other members when we do installations. And so, the idea is there, the art is picked, the labels are probably made, but the art needs to go on the wall. And the lighting. I think that I changed from halogen to LED lights in the gallery's lighting system pretty much before anything else in the building happened. Of course, our new wing is only LED lighting. And during COVID time, 90% of the building probably has been converted from fluorescent and incandescent and halogen to LED. There's still some things to go, but for the most part, we've done that conversion. Did I get everything? Okay.
Rodney, is,
Closer to you.
okay, I just didn't want to get feedback. If one has religious art, is it possible to bring it in and see if it's something that you want?
Yes. We are always happy to look at things and consider them for the collection. We're, of course, trying to be both broad and deep, collecting across the Bible and then collecting also across many different artists. I love to be able to tell a story with 3 or 4 pieces of art made from completely maybe different materials or different parts of the world by different kinds of artists. And of course, there are gaps in the collection and stories we don't have, but we're always very happy to look at and consider things, yes.
If anyone else was here last night and was able to just be blown away by the window, our wonderful window. I've never seen it, I guess, when the sun was shining directly into it, and I could not believe it. I've looked at that window, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and last night I just could not believe it. Would you tell us everything you know about our beautiful Tiffany window?
Well, first of all, we don't actually have any Tiffany glass in the collection. There's a window at the end of the hallway of a couple of angels that for a long time people thought was perhaps by Tiffany, but I did some research and unfortunately I proved that all wrong. I discovered who made it and where it came from. The stained glass in the sanctuary, the rose window at the back of the balcony and the dome window in the ceiling are original to the space. They're from 1897. If you look back into the narthex, out into the Nicollet Mall entrance, there's glass there, and there's glass in some of those stairway areas. That's original glass too. But the sanctuary had decorative but not picture-telling glass until the 50s and 60s, when the Willette windows went in. Because of course we're still somewhat recovering from that Reformation. Remember the Reformation that destroyed all of the art? Mm-hmm. And all 3 of our buildings were built during the Victorian time. They were appropriately decorative for their time, but didn't have any symbolism. The sanctuary didn't have a cross until the 30s. The windows came in the 50s and the 60s. And then eventually we started to have a couple of pieces of art like the Granlund. And then, oh goodness, what have we done now?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who walk by this building and have absolutely no idea what's inside. Have you any plans for community events that might be an exhibit?
My dream is always to get the community into the gallery and into the church, and it is not an easy task. For years, Mary Abbey was the art critic for the Star Tribune and wrote, endlessly about art. And I met her a number of times. I sent her press releases a number of times. I tried everything I could, and she just said, "Rodney, stop talking to me about this. I don't talk about art in churches." There's a sort of a bias in the media about that. There's someone new at the Strib who writes about art sometimes but does other things. She was actually here for an event and I talked to her and I've tried to send her things, but it just doesn't happen. So we have this incredible hidden treasure and it's really, really hard to get the word out into the world. If you have ideas, let us know. Well, yes, we don't have an advertising budget. That's maybe the problem.
Rodney, we've got another question from the live stream. Can you tell us about the archive storage system?
Sure. So, when the archive was built, it was built according to museum standards. And so we have special cabinets to hold costume that is on hangers. We have special cabinets for textiles. They are rolled rather than folded. There's a collapsible system that holds some of the art that isn't on the walls. And then, of course, the archive holds all of our historic papers, all of the documents and various things that are part of our history. And that is all in a temperature-controlled and humidity-controlled space that had initially fluorescent lighting, but the fluorescent lighting had UV filtering sleeves on it to protect against UV light. So built as a state-of-the-art archive storage space. Does that answer the question, do you think? And of course, we have volunteers who work in the archive every Wednesday, or every Thursday afternoon, too. Don't we, Peggy? Are we running out of questions?
I have a question, Rodney. What do you foresee as the future of the Westminster Gallery and collections?
The future? Well, that's a scary topic because some of us might be contemplating an eventual retirement. Not right now, but you know, it's in the thinking process. So I'm assuming that the gallery will continue. The collection is big enough that it's kind of taken on a life of its own. I imagine that at some point someone will come after me who will do kind of what I do, probably through a new set of lenses, and may do things a little bit differently, but I'm very confident that the gallery will continue to have exhibitions and the collection will continue to grow. Something I didn't mention before, but I just sort of thought of, we don't just exhibit art in our building, we also do act as a lending library. Right now, I think that there's only 3 pieces from our collection at Grace Trinity in Uptown, but oftentimes we have art that's on loan to other churches or seminaries or other places around the Twin Cities. And once we even sent 2 paintings to an exhibition in Manhattan. So, you know, the collection is here to be shared and enjoyed, not to just be hiding in the basement.
I apologize if I missed this before. How large is the collection?
I don't have an actual number. I keep sort of estimating, but I don't get there. We are slowly in the process of cataloging the collection. We have, of course, files for all of the art and files for all of the artists, so we have the documentation, but we haven't been as intentional about making that formal yet. And we're now working with Past Perfect, which is a cataloging software, and getting art into it. And at some point later, I can give you a real number. There's 225 plus creches. There's 33 Watanabe prints. There's about 30 John August Swanson pieces if we don't include all the posters. We have about 30 of Joan Bolig's etchings. You know, I can sort of guesstimate by some of the artists, but I don't really have the total number.
And what about sculptures?
Well, of course, there's all the Paul Granlunds. I would think that the creches probably count as sculpture. We have other pieces, maybe not as much. Most of our art, I suppose, tends to be flat. We do also, of course, collect textiles.
Could you comment on other churches that have collections in town?
Sure. There are other churches that have collections, but I think that none of them are maybe as intentional as we are. The Basilica has a smallish but nice collection. They have a very large collection of creches as well. They also have a gallery that rotates exhibitions. Central Lutheran has some art. Hennepin Methodist has both a very large collection of early paintings and other art in their collection, and they have a small gallery space. Other places I think that a lot of churches have some art. Not many of them have maybe as robust an exhibition program as we do. It's what we have is unusual, both in the city and just in general.
Are there other churches that have people on staff like you?
There is nobody like me. To some extent, there are churches that have people who might have working with art or a gallery as part of their job. I don't think it's very common that someone has a full-time person like me. I think of the Basilica, they have 2 people on staff who work with liturgy and also work with their museum program, or their music program, which is extensive, and then jointly manage a collection and a gallery.
Are there particular artists or representations of groups or gaps in the collection that you're always looking for?
Yes, and sometimes I don't know what those gaps are. I kind of think about it like this. If you just imagine, I'm making up numbers, so don't hold me to any of this, but say there's 50,000 stories in the Bible. And of those 50,000 stories, maybe 1,000 of them have been reproduced in art, and maybe we have 100 of them. There's huge amounts of biblical information that I think hasn't ever been reproduced in art. And of course, we're looking to, as broadly as we can, represent all of the stories.
Would you please say a little bit about how the Sunday services are planned so that everything is so well coordinated with music and art?
Sure. Tim goes away to Ghost Ranch in the summer for a couple of weeks and produces what we call the green machine. And it's the green machine because it's traditionally printed on green paper. But it's also really easy to find in your office if some people have messy offices, I guess. And so working with the music program, the 9-month school year worship is planned out from broad themes to shorter themes. The scripture is chosen, the sermon title is suggested, an outline of what might be included in the service. The music is all laid into place. Of course, these things are fluid and change as things happen in life. But we start with this plan in advance. And of course, many of us have access to this, so we know what's coming. And you, of course, have noticed that there's traditionally art on the cover of the bulletin, and that is one of the things that I do, is looking at the sermon title, looking at what notes there might be, reading the scripture that's going to be read, and then thinking, do we have something in the collection that fits that? Do we have something in the collection that kind of goes with it? We don't, because of those 50,000 stories I imagined that haven't been made in art, a lot of times there isn't something that exactly fits. But that's one of the things that we work at. So it is a group effort and very intentional. You'll notice references in prayers that echo what was read or what was said. We don't just make it up as we go. Only I do that.
Thank you. Do you write all of the descriptions that are next to the pictures?
Yes, I produce the labels. So when you find a typo, tell me, don't tell someone else.
They're interesting to me.
Thank you so much, Rodney. Now, Rodney, you did say you were going to do a song and dance. I haven't heard any song, and I haven't seen any dancing yet.
Sort of gestural bounds.
Wow. We have learned a lot. Thank you so much, Rodney. That was fantastic. As you may have heard, the Third Age will be taking the summer off. The committee won't. The committee will be working, but we will not be presenting any programs. There are programs held by the Magnet Center. You may want to check out their newsletter, and Angelique has actually got copies of the newsletter here, so you can pick it up, and that will have May and June's calendar in it. Otherwise, you can find the Magnet Center newsletter on our website under the Magnet Center. And when the next one comes out, that'll be there too. I think that's about it. I wanted to thank everybody for coming. We will have coffee and cookies and encourage you to stay and talk among yourselves or ask Rodney questions. I think he'll still be here. So Dwayne has got the coffee ready and back. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.